A collection of ghost stories. Volume 1. A novel by Neil Wesson. Chapter 11. A message from the grave. The cold wind blew the sleet across the graveyard, whipping into the faces of the graveside mourners. This was not an uncommon sight, another accident in one of the many factories springing up in the towns due to the onset of mechanization. The Industrial Revolution was changing the face of the land, both urban and rural. The man in the plain coffin was Alfred Woodman, a laborer from one of the many mills which sat on the banks of the River Hall. As the vicar finished off the service, the widow of the man in the box rose, threw a handful of clay into the grave, and then the mourners dispersed over the street to the Ship Inn public house. The vicar returned to the church as the gravediggers began to fill in the hole, finally placing the turf on the top of the small grave-shaped mound protruding over the natural lie of the damp grassy ground. On entering the vestry, the vicar removed his cassock and shivered. The room was cold and damp. It smelt of old books and yellowing paper. He lit a candle, for it was starting to get dark. It was now late in the afternoon, and the 3 gas lights that lined the main street were now lit. He was cold. A quick nip from the bottle of whiskey which he kept in the old freestanding cupboard would soon put pay to that. He opened the door and looked in. The bottle normally sat out of view behind a pile of hymn books on the left-hand side of the second shelf, but on moving the pile of books he saw the bottle had gone. It was only then that he realized someone else was in the room with him. He turned back toward the door. Sitting behind the half-open door was a man in late middle age, the verger. In one hand he held a whiskey bottle, in the other a glass. "All right, vicar," he said, raising the glass in salute, before taking a generous slug of the drink. "There's a bit of a nip in the air. I thought I'd just have a quick un to keep the cold out," he said, pouring another large measure into the glass. "Tell me, as the vicar, just what do you think you're doing, verger?" "Oh, just helping myself," he said, his voice slurring slightly. "But then you'd know all about that, wouldn't you?" "My dear fellow, I think you are under a misapprehension." "Oh, no," he replied resolutely. "You've been drinking. You can't be sure what you're saying. Why don't we just forget all about this, and say nothing more of it?" "I know exactly what I'm saying, Martin." Calling the vicar by his Christian name took him back somewhat. Allowances must be made for a drunkard. "I've seen you every Sunday taking your own cut of the offertory, all the money from that service you have just given. Not all of that will make it into the church coffers." For a moment the vicar thought. "Do you have any proof of this?" he asked in a calm voice. "Only the proof of my own eyes." The verger took another drink. "Come and see me at the vicarage tomorrow. I'm sure that we can discuss your future salary. I think you're more than due a rise." The verger took the hint. A smile appeared on his face. The two men had come to an understanding. That would do, for now. On the third attempt he managed to stand. Realizing he still held the bottle in his hand, he mentally plotted a path back to the cupboard. The vicar could see what the verger's eyes were trying to plan. Not wanting the contents of the cupboard spread across the floor, he decided to dissuade his employee. "No, he said quickly, "you can keep the bottle. There was hardly anything left of it in any case." "Ah, right you are." He shuffled round and made for the door. All his concentration was on getting out of the room. His senses didn't react to the noise behind him. The noise was the vicar scraping a candlestick along the tabletop, an old heavy silver candlestick. Moments later the same piece of high regalia was falling through the air, before embedding itself into the verger's head. The verger felt no pain. The alcohol had numbed his body. His face hit the cold hard stone flagged floor of the church. His nose exploded as it impacted, pushing the piece of bone that serves as the ridge up into his head. If he wasn't killed by the blow of the candlestick, then he was dead now. A trickle of blood seeped out from under his broken face. The vicar panicked, though he controlled it well, dragging the body back into the vestry, before dropping the verger's feet down on the floor. What could he do with the body? Frantically he looked around the room, searching for the catalyst of an idea. The crypt, he could put it in the crypt. No one ever went down there. No, too risky. Occasionally someone would venture down there. He had no transport, he couldn't take it away. On the floor one of the verger's eyes was looking up at him. It was unnerving to say the least. On the floor of the vestry lay a rug. He could roll the body up in it, that would do for now. As he turned it through 90 degrees it groaned. The noise gave the vicar the fright of his life. Suddenly something else added to his terror, the sound of the front door to the church opening. The latch clinked while the old iron hinges creaked as it opened. The vicar froze with fear. The sound of heavy feet walking through the church could clearly be made out. The clergyman was almost paralyzed with fear, but what did he have to fear? Apart from the events of the past few moments, nothing. Stepping over the carpet-covered body, he looked out of the door to see who was in the church. The figure, a man, had walked in. The vicar recognized him as one of the mourners from the funeral. "Can I help you, sir?" asked the vicar, closing the vestry firmly behind him. The visitor was cold and wet, snow clung to his brown overcoat and around the soles of his boots. "Hello again, Vicar. I was He paused for a moment, then held out a coin in between his fingers, looking for the collection box. The vicar didn't believe him. Though outwardly he remained calm, his head was spinning. It seemed to him that it was more likely that this man had come, enchancing his arm, to see what he could make off with. "It's by the door," the vicar replied. As he did, he placed the candlestick on the altar. With a bit of luck, this man would make off with it. "Thank you, Vicar." The mourner turned and walked off, only pausing to drop the coin in the box before slamming the door closed. Now back to more serious things. What to do with the body laying in the vestry? The man who had just left had gave the vicar the answer. At 12:30 that night, the wind howled through the trees of the churchyard. Sleet still blew down from the north, battering the 14th century Norman church. The only light source was coming from the Ship public house. This threw just enough illumination for the vicar to work by. He carefully took the turf off the top of the mound and laid it to one side, then with the gravedigger's spade began to dig. With the grave only being a few hours old, the loose earth came out easily. Each spadeful was on the whole dry and powdery. Once down around 5 feet, the blade of the tool hit wood. Looking around to ensure the surrounding village was all quiet, the vicar rolled the body of the verger into the grave. It made a thud as it hit the coffin below. The vicar breathed a sigh of relief, but there was still work to do. Picking up the spade once again, he started to backfill the hole. It only took a matter of minutes, and then it was done. The turf placed back on top, and there it was done. Nobody would ever know. More to the point, the grave couldn't be opened without an order from the local magistrate, and he was a very religious man. He didn't believe in the digging up of graves. Fatigued, he cleaned down the spade before returning it to the tool shed and heading back toward the vicarage. After a good half bottle of whiskey, he retired to bed. He should have slept soundly, the effects of his labors mixed with the strong liquor, but he couldn't. The face of the man lying dead in the grave haunted his mind. The next day was a Saturday, and it was a weary-looking vicar that took the wedding service of 2 local young people. An invitation to the wedding breakfast had been issued to him by the bride's parents. The thing with village life was everybody knew one another, so to refuse would be altogether rude. How he stayed awake through it, he did not know. A good night's sleep would be assured tonight. It was his normal routine to take a walk around the church and graveyard last thing at night, but as he came out of the Ship Inn, he didn't cross the street to the Lick Gate. He decided to go home. Another night of torment ensued. Now, though, not only did he see the face of the verger, but he saw him standing at the end of an open grave with what looked like a candlestick in his hand. He lost count of how many times the vision came to him. The last one of the night, the specter beckoned him to come closer. After that, he did not even dare close his eyes. His night had been spent in a cold sweat. After the Sunday morning service, no one mentioned the absence of the verger. He wasn't very much liked around the village. He wasn't one of them. He was from outside. Once the last of the congregation had left, the vicar returned to his vestry and quickly changed. On his way out, he noticed that the candlestick had gone from the altar. He allowed himself a smile of relief. Over the following week, nothing out of the ordinary happened in the village. Life returned to normal. No one seemed to miss the verger, so nothing more was said. The weather too turned fair. Even the snowdrops were coming into flower. Then tragedy hit the close-knit community. Long-standing resident Albert Hurd died. He had lived his whole life in the village. The only time he'd left was to fight in the Great War. The funeral was attended by almost the entire community. The vicar gave the service at the graveside, as was the wishes of Albert. "I am the resurrection." He spoke the words from the heart, as he had known Albert all his life, but then he suddenly stopped. Something had caught his eye. The grave he had buried the verger in had not fallen. The bulge of grave-shaped earth would normally have started to subside after a week. It was still as he had left it that night, over a week earlier. After the service, everyone gravitated across the street to the inn. Even the gravediggers went to toast the old man before filling the hole. This act was highly irregular, but today it was tolerated. The vicar took full advantage of this. He took one of the spades and raised it above his head before bringing it down here on the mound of earth on the verger's grave. He spent a good 5 minutes flattening it down. It looked much better, almost flat. He stood back to admire his handiwork. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw something. It made his heart stop and blood run cold. Slowly he turned around. Fear filled him as he worked up the courage to turn to see what was there. Something from the dark reaches of his mind. Something told him, even before he turned, he knew the specter of the verger had returned to haunt him. As he looked, he realized that all it was a piece of black fabric in a tree. The only ghost he knew existed was the third part of the Holy Trinity. With a sense of relief, he too followed the example of the rest of the village and joined them in the pub. As darkness fell, the mourners were still going strong in the public house. The wind and rain had whipped up outside, so everybody stayed in the pub. The vicar felt uneasy, not with being in a public house. He'd spent many nights on there. Something else troubled him. Home, he thought, would be the best place to be tonight. A fire in the grate always made him feel better. He opened the door and stepped out into the cold, dark night. Dropping his head toward the pavement, he set off toward the vicarage. Then something made him stop and look over the street toward the church. A light was shining through the stained glass window. The lit gate opened with a creak, the wind blowing it shut behind him. Head down against the elements, he crossed the churchyard. Looking up again, he realized there was no light coming out of the church at all. It must have been a reflection off of the moon, or maybe the pub. He found that he had come to a stop beside the still open grave containing Albert Hurd's uncovered coffin. The gravediggers hadn't been back to fill it in yet. No doubt they were still in the pub. Once again he noticed the grave he had flattened earlier that afternoon. The mound was back. He had spent all that time flattening it, and had come back. Was someone playing a joke on him? Was it the verger? Maybe he wasn't dead? No, that can't be. He buried him. Is this yours? A familiar voice said. It came from the vicar's left-hand side. He turned to look, but no one stood there. Here, said the voice again. The vicar turned to see in front of him the verger, face twisted and blooded. His right arm was raised above his head in the hand a candlestick. But you're dead, the vicar struggled out the words as a clap of thunder sounded. The candlestick came down on the vicar's head, his body falling into the open grave. A week later, on the request of the magistrate, Albert Hurd's grave was opened. On top of Albert's coffin lay the body of the vicar, the missing candlestick in his hand. The grave from the funeral a week previous was also opened, and the body of the verger was found laying in peace with a smile on his cold white face. The end.